Hello and welcome to another Mr. Carter Science Special. In this video we'll be looking at plants and in particular their tissues and organs and the functions of those tissues and organs that you find in a plant. Now before we get into that, it's important to quickly recap photosynthesis. Remember that photosynthesis is a chemical reaction that occurs in green plant cells where energy from sunlight is used to make carbon dioxide and water join together to form glucose and oxygen. This chemical reaction occurs on a molecule called chlorophyll. So the carbon dioxide will have to enter the leaf through holes on the bottom of the leaf known as stomata, and the water is absorbed through the roots and transported up the stem to the leaf in a tube called the xylem. And don't forget our word equation for photosynthesis: carbon dioxide plus water gives you glucose plus oxygen. We also need light energy. As a simple equation, we need some light energy and we also need to have some chlorophyll, but they are not considered to be part of a word equation. We put them above and below the arrow. And the balanced symbol equation is 6CO2 plus 6H2O gives you C6H12O6 glucose plus 6O2. So what different organs does a plant actually have? Well, a plant will have roots. In particular, they will contain a specialised cell known as root hair cells. Plants obviously have an organ called leaves, and they contain a variety of different tissues: epidermis, palisade mesophyll, spongy mesophyll, and stomata tissues. Plants will have a stem, which is an organ containing xylem and phloem tissue. And occasionally, when a plant wishes to reproduce, it will create a flower, and flowers contain reproductive tissues such as the anthers, the ovaries, and nectar forming tissues, and the nectar will attract any pollinators. So let's have a look at a cross section of a leaf. Now remember, a leaf is an organ, and an organ is a group of similar tissues with a similar function. So all of these different tissues that we're looking at are all quite similar, and they all work together to make certain that this leaf can carry out photosynthesis at the maximum rate. So at the top of the leaf we have a waxy cuticle which prevents water loss. We have the upper epidermis, which is a protective layer. We have the lower epidermis, again a protective layer, and a lower waxy cuticle preventing water loss. We have the stomata surrounded by the two guard cells. Remember, the stomata is just a hole that allows air to enter our leaf and enter the air spaces of the leaf so that the carbon dioxide within that air can diffuse into the cells, be it the mesophyll cells or indeed all the way into the palisade cells for use in photosynthesis. Unfortunately, the stomata will also allow water to evaporate out and leave by transpiration. We also have the palisade cells and the spongy mesophyll cells, which are both well adapted to allow a large amount of photosynthesis to happen. They both contain chlorophyll within chloroplasts that you can see within the diagram here, and they have a particular structure which will help them to either absorb the maximum amount of sunlight. For example, the palisade cells are always found in an upright position, so there is very few cell walls between the sunlight entering the leaf and reaching the palisade cells. In fact, there's only 1, 2, 3 cell walls there that could absorb some sunlight and reduce the amount of light reaching the chloroplast and the chlorophyll. Spongy mesophyll cells also have a very high rate of high rate of photosynthesis, and this is because they're surrounded by the air spaces. They have a very large surface area touching those air spaces, so the mesophyll cells, although they get less light energy, they get a very high amount of carbon dioxide, and therefore they can carry out a high rate of photosynthesis. So how could we summarize all of that? Well, the leaf is adapted to its function because it has a waxy cuticle, a waterproof layer that stops the leaf losing too much water. The palisade cells have lots of chromosomes to absorb light energy to make photosynthesis happen. The leaves have a large surface area so they can absorb lots of light energy. And the cells in the leaf need to absorb carbon dioxide from the air, and the air gets into the leaf through holes in the bottom surface called stomata. And guard cells can help to close those stomata at night to stop the leaf losing too much water. But what about some of the other organs? What about the roots? Well, the roots have a variety of functions. They will help to hold the plant in place. They will help to absorb minerals and water. And to do that, they have specialised cells called root hair cells. So the root hair cells actually have a very large surface area, so they have a faster rate of absorption of water and minerals from the soil. Root hair cells have no chloroplasts because there's no sunlight under the soil, so there's no point in the plant wasting energy producing chloroplasts that will not be used. And you can see that in our diagram of the root hair cell down there. Now, plants do need a large range of minerals, including magnesium, nitrates and phosphorus. Magnesium is needed by plants to make chlorophyll molecules. Nitrate is needed by plants to make amino acids when they combine the nitrates with glucose. And once you've made amino acids, you can therefore make proteins. And phosphorus is needed by plants to grow healthy roots. So if we have a look at the diagram here of a root and root hair cells, we can see that we have the root hair cells here. And we can see in our larger diagram here that the root hair cells will absorb water in two different ways. They will use osmosis to carry the water through the cells themselves, through the cytoplasm, and then through and towards the xylem tissue, which will form into the stem eventually. Water can also move through the root hair cells through the actual cell walls by diffusion. So we've got two different pathways that water can flow through the root hair cells, through the cells of the root and into the xylem and up the stem to the leaves. So how exactly do plant roots absorb minerals and water? Well, minerals like nitrates and magnesium are in a very low concentration in the soil and a high concentration in the root hair cells. The minerals will move from the low concentration to the high concentration by active transport, and they will enter the cell. The concentration in the root hair cells will therefore increase, and there is now a low concentration outside the cell and a high concentration inside the cell. So water will actually follow and enter by osmosis. Now, once the water and the minerals are inside the cell, they will be inside the plant. They will be transported by the xylem. And the xylem is a long tube that carries water and minerals from the roots to the leaves. Minerals are actively transported into the root hair cells. Don't forget that needs energy. That means that there will be a large number of mitochondria within those root hair cells to carry out that respiration and release the energy needed for active transport. And once the minerals are actively transported into the root hair cells, this creates the high concentration needed so that water can follow by osmosis. Water then moves through the root to the xylem by diffusion and through the cells and the walls by osmosis from cell to cell towards the xylem. Xylem cells themselves are dead. The top and bottom of the cells have disappeared, so the cells form a continuous tube for water to travel up. And they have a thick cell walls and rings of hard lignin to withstand the water pressure. If you have ever drunk a drink through a straw and you suck too hard, you will find that straw sort of collapses and you can't move any more liquid into your mouth. That could happen within the xylems, and that's why they have these rings of very, very hard lignin that you can see here to prevent the collapse of that xylem. A classic experiment you've hopefully seen in your classroom is where you take a piece of celery and you place it into a beaker with some red or some blue food colouring, and you leave it for a few days, and as the water moves up through the xylem of the celery tube, celery stalk, the celery stem, you can actually see that the food colouring follows. So when you cut into that stem of the celery plant, you can identify clearly where the xylem tubes are. If you look more closely at the stem of a plant, you'll see that we have the xylem on the inside of the stem, and the other tube that transports sugars and water down from the leaves to the roots or up to the flowers is known as the phloem, and that's found on the outside of the stem. So the phloem is a tube made out of two particular cells, the sieve cells and the companion cells. And the job of a phloem, the function of a phloem, is to transport sugars, sucrose, up and down the plant. Now the transport of sucrose is known as translocation. Sucrose itself is a molecule made out of two different sugars joined together, glucose produced in photosynthesis and a similar sugar, fructose. They join together to make the sucrose molecule. So the phloem, as we've said, is made up of two different cells, the sieve cells and next to them the companion cells. And they have their own adaptations to allow this translocation of sucrose solution. So they have holes in the end of the cell walls which will allow liquids to flow from one sieve cell to the next sieve cell, so both up and down. The sieve cells also have a very small amount of cytoplasm, as you can see here, and that means there's more room for the central channel. The companion cells have pores here which will allow for the movement of sucrose in and out through active transport and diffusion, depending whereabouts in the plant the phloem happens to be. They have a large amount of mitochondria within the companion cells, which means they can carry out a lot of respiration and therefore release a large amount of energy, which can be used to actively transport sucrose both in and out of the sieve cells and the phloem itself. So why do we need to transport sucrose around the plant? Well, the sucrose is used by flower tissues to make nectar, so that's why we have to transport sucrose up the stem towards the flowers. The sucrose can be broken down into glucose and used in respiration by the mitochondria found in all plant cells, and in particular the cells of the companion cells and also root hair cells, which both need to carry out a lot of active transport and so need the energy released from respiration. And the sucrose can be broken down into glucose and combined with nitrates that have been absorbed from the soil by root hair cells. And the glucose and the nitrates are combined together to form amino acids, which themselves can be combined to form proteins needed by the plant for growth and for repair. I hope you have enjoyed this short video on the tissues and organs of plants. Thank you very much for watching. If you have, comment below, let me know what you've learnt, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you very much.